So, hi everyone, and a very warm welcome to this session, which is actually a very new one. This is the masterclass for part two. We thought we'll have it just before the exam so that people who are planning to give the part two exam, this may be beneficial to those. So, I think I'll start the session. So, basically, what I'll be talking about today is some tips which you can maybe follow for your MRCOG2 exam. Then we have a quiz session, and following this, we'll have discussion of two high yield important topics. One is the NHS cervical screening program, and second is the Jehovah's Witness. Both these topics are extremely important from perspective of your part 2 exam. So that is the reason of choosing them. And I would request all of you to make this webinar an interactive one. So if you have any queries during the session, please do place it on chat, and I would love to interact with all of you. The core curriculum for part 2 comprises of these 15 modules, and as you all know, paper 1 and paper 2, the total is 200 questions. So you can imagine that you can divide 200 by 15, and you can see that each module will have so many questions. And out of these, 50% are in form of EMQs and 50% are in form of SPAs. So I would request all of you that I know there's a lot to study and there's a lot of stress also before the exam. And that is the reason of taking this masterclass. But make sure you don't leave any module, because on anything, like for example, gynecological oncology, surely there'll be a EMQ. Similarly, urogynecology, pelvic floor problems, also surely there'll be an EMQ. Other things, they may be a EMQ, there may be few SPAs, but these two are the modules where surely you can be 100% sure you'll get a good EMQ. Obviously, in antenatal care, management of delivery, postpartum problems, there will be EMQs. So my basic advice to all of you is that please don't leave any module. Even if you have to leave any module half done, at least make sure you have glanced through every module so that you can attempt a little. It should not be that for finishing one particular module you leave other modules behind. So that is important. And if you have, like right now we are almost 1 week from the exam, so right now is the time when you should focus on solving the mock papers more. Mock papers, exam, EMQs, so that the knowledge which you had acquired in the past few months, that will come to you back to you in form of the SPAs and EMQs, and you'll get a hang of doing it. So when the actual exam comes, you'll feel less stressed out. So that is something which my advice to all of you is that please go through as many EMQs during this time as much as possible. As much as possible, try solving the mock papers during this particular time. Also, if you have the time, go through the GTG guidelines, the protocols, the topics I already discussed with you, that each of the module is important. But especially if there's an emergency scenario, that becomes very important, because that is somewhere where they'll not, if you are not able to do a particular question related to emergency scenario or a situation where either the maternal or the uh, baby's well-being is at stake, and you're not able to attempt that question, probably you may get, because that question may have a higher marks allocated to it. So it is important that you don't miss those questions and you solve them correctly. Again, audit, genetics, evidence-based medicine, statistics, clinical governance, leadership principles, the 7 pillars of NHS, all these things are important. And I'm sure all of you have already gone through it. So those who are already, who have gone through it and who are going on this track, you can put Y on the chat. Those who are not doing it can put an N. So I encourage all of you to please participate. I'm getting from Dr. Aditi, I've got a Y, but I need more Ys or more Ns from the rest of you. So basically, the part two format, like I already discussed, that it has 50 EMQs and 50 SPAs. And an EMQ is designed to assess basically your clinical reasoning, problem solving, and diagnostic skills. And EMQs are the ones which take more time. So try to devote, because your paper will have 50 EMQs and 50 SPAs. Some of the SPAs would be so simple that you may just take maybe few seconds to just read it and give the answer to it. But in EMQ, try to devote more time for the EMQ. So as you already know that paper one, 3 hours, paper two, 3 hours, and there's 1 hour of break in between. So it is a 7 hour long exam, which can be quite stressful. There's a question which says, is your book enough to prepare for MRCG2? Book covers majority of the modules, but I would also advise you, book also has some questions available to you, but you don't have lots of questions. At least if you can go through, the book doesn't give you mock papers. So if you can at least go through the mock papers now, because right now, if you're planning to give the exam right now, that is the 1st of July, then you don't have enough time. So during this time, I would not suggest you to maybe purchase a comprehensive course, but at least I think you should go ahead with the mock papers, because that will give you a lot of practice with the EMQs and with the SPAs. So that should do the preparation for you. And I would advise you for that. So again, coming back to this, that this is it's a stressful exam. 7 hours of thinking, 7 hours of giving an exam is not easy. So make sure you've had a good night's sleep before the day of the exam. Make sure that you don't attend a night duty the previous night and then you're going to give the exam. Make sure you have good night's sleep, because that will help you during the exam. All the things which you maybe learned months back, then probably they'll come back to you and you'll remember the things which you had, the concepts you had built long back, they'll come back to you. And plus, okay, so you are planning to appear in Jan. In that case, I would suggest, if you have the book, along with the book, it would be a good idea to also have the course, if that is something you are looking at, because that will give you a comprehensive coverage. Just the getting the mock papers is just enough before the exam. So maybe you can check with the team, and maybe you can check with the marketing on that. Because then with the course, you get the comprehensive, you get everything which you require. You just don't get, and obviously, the book acts as a main source of theory so that you can build up your concepts before the exam. Most of the guidelines are updated, and I'm also working on the third edition of the part two book, and I believe it should be out the next year, early next year sometime. So some of the guidelines in the previous version, especially the endometrial, the oncology guidelines, they might be the old ones. So all those, the new guidelines have been covered in the course. So I'm just telling you so that you can take a decision based on that. So now coming to the structure of the SPA and structure of an EMQ. So structure of an SPA has a clinical stem. There's a lead-in question and there are 5 options. So clinical stem would be more like a clinical scenario. And the lead-in question is the actual question which you have to answer. And options would be 5. Again, the SPA stands for single best answer. So sometimes the options which they may give, they may be quite similar to each other, but you have to choose the best option. So be careful. Make sure you have read all the options in the exam, because some of the options, they might be very close to each other and you might think that option C is the answer even without reading D and E. And later you may realize when you read D and E that no, D and E, D or E is a better option than C. So make sure you read all the options, and sometimes just to confuse you, they might give very similar options. So you have to choose the best option out of those. That is what the trick is. So make sure you choose the best. And in an EMQ, you know that there's a lead in statement or an instruction, whether you have to reach the diagnosis or you have to decide the management. And then there are questions or scenarios, and there is a long list of options from which you have to choose the correct answer. So again, I'm emphasizing that try to devote more time. What I mean is, don't keep 50% of your time for SBAs. Keep 60 to 70% for EMQs, and 40% you can keep for SBAs. So devote more time for EMQs. Don't keep it 50-50. It may become a problem for you. And try solving all those questions which you can immediately answer, you solve. And then later, the ones which you were not able to solve, you can go on them. In the electronic computerized examination system, there is an option to flag the questions. So the ones which you leave, you can flag it so that later you can easily discover those questions, the flagged questions, and you can spend time on that. Because once you have solved the maybe 50-60% of the paper, then at least psychologically you have the assurance that yes, you have time in hand and you would be able to do it. So again, because all of you have already gone through the rigor of MRCOG part 1, I don't have to really explain the format of an SPA to you. But just for the sake of completion, just for somebody, if they are just maybe somebody from part 1 is here, so for them, uh, so you know that first you have the clinical scenario, which is the STEM, and then you can see here this is the actual question, and then you have the 5 options, and you have to choose the correct option out of these. Now, an EMQ, on the other hand, will have, so this is the STEM, that this is for each of the clinical scenario, choose the most appropriate option. And in this case, it is the instrument which you have to choose. And these are the options. So the number of options is very, very large in comparison to what you have for an SPA. And to go through each option and then think whether it is applicable for the question or not may take some time. So for example, now you may have for this particular set of EMQ, you may have questions like which instrument is used to dissect the ureter in radical hysterectomy. So you have to choose out of these. So the best way, what I advise the students, how you should decide is a test which is known as cover test. So the best way is that you cover the options with your hand and then think of the answer which could be associated with that particular question. And then you look at the options and you see if what you thought in your mind is also there in the list of options. That means you are going in the correct direction. You don't have to think much in that case. And you can go ahead and you can mark that option as correct, because 99% of the times it would be correct, because if without looking at the options you have thought of the answer and it is there, and in case it is not there, then you start reading each option carefully and start assessing and then try to correlate which could be the best applicable answer for that particular situation. I'm looking at the chat, and Dr. Tabassum. So the modules in the course and the modules in the book, if you would have checked, they are quite similar. Again, I've told you previously also that all the modules have been covered as per the RCOG curriculum, and it is important for all of you to know each and every module, because each of them will have some questions. So it is not a good idea to leave some module behind. So I think you start from the first module and you go on. And in case you require a more detailed session with me on understanding how to schedule your study, you can check with the marketing and we'll arrange a separate one-to-one session with you. Is, is that okay? So I have already told you this, that method of solving at EMQ, even the SPA, this the cover test is considered to be the best method. And it is important to develop a study plan. So probably because I assume that now that you're planning for part two, most of you who are here, you probably you can mention on the chat how many of you are doing your PG. Even if you're doing your PG, I know it is a very hectic time. As a OBG PG, you'll get rarely any time for self study. I know how difficult it must be for you people. And those of you who have done your MD must be in practice somewhere. Even for you people to get time, I know would be difficult. So you have to develop a plan. I think consistency is more important. So even if you can take out, say, maybe 2 hours a day, 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the night, it is up to you how you want to take out. Consistency, I think, is the key rather than. So if you're preparing for the January exam, for those people, the consistency is the key. So try to devote every day and try to follow that. It doesn't matter if you cannot, even if it is 1 hour every day, make sure you catch that 1 hour and you do your studies. It doesn't matter how much time, because I believe 6 months to 1 year is a good time to do all your preparations. And in that time, you can plan it because I know you are all busy practitioners. So you can, but if you have this in your mind that I have to give MRCG, then you will also have the thing to take out a little time in between. So I have a question on the chat. I've missed the initial slides. Give me a quick review of the initial 6 slides. So I did not cover too much, and I'll tell you what. So this is Dr. Reddy. Um, so I'll just briefly give you the points which I just discussed. That this is the core curriculum, and make sure that these are the 15 modules as per the RCOG curriculum. Make sure that you, before giving your exam, you don't go unprepared with either of them. Even if some modules are 60-70% done and you feel that you have not done 100% justification, make sure that you've glanced through all the modules, because you will have questions from each and every module. So that is something which is very, very important. Then the pattern of the paper, I think you must be already aware of the pattern, that there's paper 1 which is for 3 hours, there's paper 2 which is for 3 hours, and each of the paper has 50 EMQs and 50 SPAs. Try spending more time on the EMQs and less time on the SPAs. Don't make it a 50-50% ratio, that I'll keep, if there are 3 hours, out of 3 hours, 1.5 hours I'll keep for SPAs and 1.5 hours I'll keep for EMQs. Please don't do that. That is a recipe for disaster and failure, because EMQs will take more time and sometimes they can be quite tricky. So try to spend more time on the EMQs. And a very, I think I need not tell you, you must be aware of the how the SPAs and what is the format of a EMQ. I don't think there is much to explain in this. And I was just giving an example of what an EMQ looks like. And what is important is you should follow cover test while solving EMQs or SBs. And cover test basically means that you cover the options with your hand and then you think of the answer which could be likely for a particular question which is asked. So we are back to where I was continuing with. So, method for studying for the exam, consistency is the key. Focus study. So, if you devote 1 hour every day, make sure that it is free of all distractions, and 1 hour goes only for MRCOG. And if you're starting with my book, then you can simultaneously also go through the chapter and simultaneously go through the videos to understand the content in a better manner. And maybe you can solve some EMQs, because if you have the course, you will have EMQs. Even with the book, you will have the EMQs and the SPs. So that'll give you an idea. So for part two, I don't think 3 months is enough. This is at least, I believe it is 6 to 12 months. Part two, I don't want to stress you people out, but part two is a more difficult exam. So you have to take that into stride. It has a very high failure rate also. And sometimes it's not, even I've seen toppers flunking. So, because this is something which RCOG part one, they may pass you immediately, but part two, they may pass you after 2 or 3 attempts. So don't get panicky about it. Don't get stressed about it. It is something which is very normal, which occurs with RCOG. It is a difficult exam, and they have made the passing rate also very, very difficult to achieve. And some of the questions may be very, very tricky. But I believe for somebody who has done MD from India, 6 to 12 months of study is still required, because you have to orient yourself as per the UK healthcare structure, or also as per the GTG, the NICE guidelines. Some of the guidelines which we follow in our country might be different from what is followed there. And at the during this session, I will be addressing two such important topics, which, as Indian students, we might not be even aware of. For example, chickenpox in pregnancy. I know we do read about it during our MD, but it doesn't usually come as a long case or an important short case in the exam. But for MRCOG, chickenpox in pregnancy is something which you'll surely get, either in form of an SP or even in form of an EMQ. So motivation remains the key. If you are motivated towards your actual goal, if you can visualize it, that once you clear all this, what you'll be able to achieve, then I think you would be able to achieve it. Persistence and patience is the key. And this is especially very important for part two. It may not be that important for part one, but for part two, because as I told you, their pass rate is very, very low. So don't get disheartened. It is absolutely fine if you are not able to achieve the part two in first go. It is absolutely fine, because 99% of the people who attempt, as far as I know, they may have to take several attempts before they actually clear the part two. Part three is still a little easier in comparison to part two, but part two is a very difficult exam, and and it's not your fault. The RCOG has set a very high standard. So it is not something that you are missing something. So please be assured about that, that there's nothing wrong with your studies, or there's nothing wrong with you per se, in case you are not able to clear it in one go. Image based questions are very few for part two, but sometimes occasionally they may be asked. So if you're when you're going through the theory part, make sure that if you encounter some images, you try to kind of memorize them or remember them. I I spoke about the importance of a good night's sleep. These are practical things, but a good night's sleep, a good breakfast, a healthy breakfast, not a very heavy one, before the exam, these are important things, because, as I told you, it's a strenuous exam. If you keep thinking for 3 hours, obviously you are likely to get hungry. So make sure you carry some snacks, some light snacks with you, so that when you get a break in between the two papers, you can eat it. So tips on time management. So when you are studying, the tips which you can follow is what is a very commonly followed technique, which is the Pomodoro's technique. What is the Pomodoro's technique? Pomodoro's technique basically means that you divide your study time into small sections of 25 minutes each. And each of this section is known as a Pomodoro. And in between each of these 25 minutes sections, so you study for 25 minutes and you take a maybe a small break after you finish studying for 25 minutes. So maybe for 5 minutes, take a small break, not a big break, just 5 minutes. Maybe you can go for a walk, or something, just 5 minutes. And once you have achieved 4 Pomodoros, so this becomes easier through this diagram. So you start here and you categorize your time into 25 minutes of working sections, and you take 5 minutes of break. So once 4 Pomodoros are completed, then you take a long break, 15 to 30 minutes. So maybe if you want to watch your favorite show or something, you can do that during that time. You can take a long break. And when you are working, just focus on your work. When you take a break, just focus on the break, because that helps. And again, as I told you, prioritize the high yield topics. Some topics which I have mentioned in my course, also in my book, also, that some topics they are very high yield. We know they'll always ask. For example, like I told you, staging of cancer. If not staging, cervical cancer screening. One question, oncology, EMQ, surely there. Urogynecology, maybe incontinence or prolapse, one question, surely there. So these are the high topics. So rather than hard work also pays. I'm not saying that, but smart work would pay you more. So, and especially when now you have resources available wherein you know about the high yield points, and you know about, like in my time, we did not have, that was a time when we did not even have the computers so much. um, YouTube also was not there at that time. So now you can scan through YouTube, you can find so many videos, you have so many apps, you have so many resources. So you would be in control, don't worry at all. Okay, also important is to simulate the exam conditions. So this is where our mock papers will help you. And even if you don't take our mock papers, try to do the mock papers somehow, because that is something which is very important. And I have learned it when I remember for my mathematics exam in my 12th standard, I did a few, there was in the neighborhood, there was some person who used to conduct classes. So I just joined for those mock papers. And that helped me so much, because you get so used to doing the exam pattern that during the actual exam, you don't feel stressed. So that is something which is very, very important. Utilize active recall and space repetition. For this, our flashcards will be very useful for you. So, if you forget something, try to recall it. Maybe you are just doing something else, and during that, you can just recall, okay, what was the drug of choice for that particular thing, or what was the most important clinical sign in that condition. So, reviewing and reflecting, especially the things which you don't remember, or those, suppose you are solving some SPs and you gave an incorrect answer. So, reviewing and reflecting on that will help you in the long run. So, that was all for the tips from my end. Now, we'll have a quiz session for you. And I would request all of you to please join in and participate in the quiz, because the quiz winner has there are attractive prizes for the quiz winner. So request all of you to scan this QR code, or you can the URL which is given below this QR code. If you are unable to scan the QR code, then you can use that URL, which is ahaslides.com/ZLMBI, and you can join through your phones, because on the screen, your phone screen, the quiz will appear. And I am encouraging all of you to please join, because once we have a substantial number of people who have joined, then we can start the quiz.
Okay, let us start the quiz. The first question is: a 24-year-old premigravida woman presents at 36 weeks of pregnancy with vulval pain and multiple superficial ulceration on the left labral fold. How will you manage her? The options are on can be visible on your screen. Kindly mark the answer. So the correct answer is administer acyclovir. None has answered it correctly. Let's see the leaderboard. No one has answered it correctly. Let's move to question 2. A high quality systematic review of RCTs with very low risk of bias shows symptom improvement after rectal nodule resection in endometriosis. What is the RCOG evidence level? Kindly mark your answer. So 3 have marked it correctly. It's level 1++. Let's move to the leaderboard. Dr. Pri is leading the leaderboard. If you answer it correctly and very promptly, then you will get a higher score. A 22-year-old G1 at 37 weeks gestation admitted with a sickle cell crisis, complaining of severe persistent pain in her right arm. She is a febrile and normotensive with no respiratory distress. Which of the following is the most appropriate first-line management? Kindly mark your answer. The correct answer is intravenous antibiotics. Let's see who is leading the leaderboard. Dr. Pri is leading the leaderboard. Let's move to next question. In post-hysterectomy wall prolapse, what is the main disadvantage of abdominal sarcolepexy compared to sacrospinous fixation? Kindly mark your answer. So the correct answer is more overall morbidity, and 3 have answered it correctly. Let's see the position on the leaderboard. Dr. Kostav is now leading the leaderboard. The next question is, what potential complication is associated with performing amniocentesis before 14 weeks of gestation in a 37-year-old pregnant woman concerned about the risk of trisomy 21? Kindly mark your answer. Prompt responses will lead to a higher score. So 9 have marked it correctly. It is development of fetal telpes. Let's see the leaderboard. Dr. SS is now leading the leaderboard. You are pre-assessing a 49-year-old woman who is due to undergo a radical hysterectomy for endometrial carcinoma. On discussing the risk of fistula formation, she asks you when this is likely to present clinically. Kindly mark your answer. So it's between 5 and 14 days post-operatively. Let's see the position on the leaderboard. Dr. SS is leading the leaderboard. You are an ST3 called by an ST1 to assist with shoulder dystocia. After difficulty, the baby is delivered with weakness in upper arm, shoulder, and difficulty in moving the elbow. What is the most likely fetal complication? Kindly mark your answer. So 10 have marked it correctly. It's brachial plexus injury. Let's see the position on the leaderboard. Dr. SS is rocking the longest streak and is leading the leaderboard. Let's see the next question. A 19-year-old at 12 weeks gestation presents with miscarriage. Scan shows fetal pole with large placental vascular spaces. What is the most likely diagnosis? Kindly mark your answer. It's partial molar pregnancy. Let's see the position on the leaderboard. This next question. A 32-week pregnant woman with Marfan syndrome requests vaginal delivery. Which echo finding mandates cesarean? Kindly mark your answer. So the correct answer is aortic root dilatation of 4 centimeter. Let's see the leaderboard. Dr. Saloni is rocking the longest streak, but Dr. SS is leading the leaderboard. Instructions for each of the clinical scenarios. Select the single most appropriate gestation when the screening test should be performed. Its optimal gestational age to accurately determine chronicity of multiple pregnancy. Kindly mark your answer. It's 11 plus 2 to 14 plus 1. Let's see the leaderboard. Saloni Dawar is rocking the longest streak, but Dr. SS is leading the leaderboard. For each of the clinical scenarios, select the single most appropriate gestation when the screening test should be performed. Question is quadruple test or integrated combined and quadruple test screening test for Down syndrome. Kindly mark your answer. So the correct is 14 plus 2 to 20 plus 0. Let's see the board. Dr. Saloni is rocking the longest streak and is leading the leaderboard. So the next question. Instructions. For each of the clinical scenarios listed, select the single most appropriate gestation when the screening test should be performed. The question is screening that prevents the risk of single gene defect disorders such as Huntington's disease. So the correct is pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Let's see the leaderboard. Dr. Saloni is rocking the longest streak, but Dr. Pre is leading the leaderboard. For each of the pathological findings, choose the single most appropriate tumor diagnosis from the list of options. Question is histology shows Singlet ring cells. Kindly mark your answer. The correct answer is Krukenberg tumor. Let's move to the leaderboard. The next question is for the pathological finding described, choose the single most appropriate tumor diagnosis from the list of options. Its question is tumor with low malignant potential and no stromal invasion. Kindly mark your answer. Prompt responses will lead to a higher score. So the correct answer is borderline serous ovarian tumor. Let's see the leaderboard. Dr. Saloni is rocking the longest streak, and Dr. Saloni is leading the leaderboard as well. Let's see the next question. For each of the pathological finding, choose a single most appropriate tumor diagnosis. Question is Mullerian origin tumor associated with poor prognosis. Kindly mark your answer. So the correct answer is papillary serous carcinoma. Let's see the leaderboard. Dr. Saloni is rocking the longest streak, and she is also leading the leaderboard. The next question. For each action, choose a single most appropriate method of treatment for menorrhagia from the list of options. Question is treatment that reduces menstrual blood loss, fibroid size, pressure symptoms, and dysmenorrhea. Kindly mark your answer. The correct answer is uterine artery embolization. Let's see the leaderboard. Dr. Saloni is rocking the longest streak, but now Dr. Roshni is leading the leaderboard. Let's move to next question. For each action, choose the single most appropriate method of treatment for menorrhagia from the list of options. Question is treatment that destroys endometrium by introducing hot fluid into the uterine cavity. Kindly mark your answer. So the correct answer is hydrothermal endometrial ablation. Let's see the leaderboard. Dr. Saloni is rocking the longest streak, and Dr. Roshni is leading the leaderboard. Let's move to next question. So this is the last question. For each action, choose the single most appropriate method of treatment for menorrhagia from the list of options. Question is treatment causing collagen denaturation and programmed cell death via heating. Kindly mark your answer. So the correct answer is radiofrequency endometrial ablation. Let's see the leaderboard. Dr. Saloni holds the longest track record, and Dr. Roshni is the winner of the quiz. Congratulations, Dr. Roshni.
Congratulations, Dr. Roshni, for winning the quiz. And we can unmute her. So, congratulations. How do you feel like after winning the quiz?
Thank you, ma'am. It's just a reflection of the preparation which I'm doing. So it really boosts the confidence with very little days for the exam. Thank you so much,
Are
ma'am.
planning for the July exam?
Yes, ma'am.
That's wonderful. So, everything done?
Hopefully, ma'am.
That's great news.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Just
you'll-
revising and yeah.
So, where are you? You are doing your MD or you have finished your
I've finished my MD, ma'am. I'm working as an assistant professor in Madras Medical College.
okay.
So I just finished it last year. So I'm just fresh and I'm just giving my part to.
That's the best time because you'll remember as
Yes,
you
ma'am.
get involved more and more in practice, you tend to forget these things.
Correct,
The
madam.
academics tends to leave you, and you tend to get more involved with the clinical problems. No,
Yes,
so
ma'am.
that's wonderful, and wishing you all the best. And let's hope you'll clear it in the first go.
Yes,
Uh,
ma'am.
when
Thank you so much, ma'am.
you will, I'm sure you will. And when was the part one given?
I gave my part one my first year, ma'am. So 2022 I had given, ma'am.
Okay, wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful planning.
I wanted to give it to my PG, but I couldn't prepare efficiently. So I thought I'll give it now.
Wonderful. So I think let's start back with.
Yes, ma'am. Sure. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, ma'am.
So as I mentioned that, and those of you who did not participate in the quiz, it would have been good. We missed you a lot because this, just like what she mentioned, it gives you a reflection of your preparation and it boosts you up. So starting with the first high yield topic for today, which is the National Health Service Cervical Screening Program or the NHS CSP. And why is it important and why I'm taking it is because most of the times they have a tendency of asking a question pertaining to this. Because again, this NHS-CSP is specific to UK NHS, this program, and this has enabled them to bring down their rate of cervical cancer. So cervical cancer is not one of the most important or the most common cancers of gynecological malignancies in the UK. The endometrial cancer is the commonest gynecological malignancy in the UK. Cervical cancer, I think, is the fourth commonest cancer in the UK in women. And that all thanks to this program, which has helped in bringing out down the uh, cervical cancer rate. So, what does this program involve? This program basically involves screening of women in the age group of 25 to 64 years. So, women within the age of 25 to 49 years, they will be send an invitation, they get an invite from the GP practice where they are registered with. So, just to give you a brief about the UK healthcare practice, each of the areas, they will have each of the specific areas in in the UK, they will be registered or booked with a NHS hospital, and they will also be booked with some GP surgeries, one or two surgeries for each of the areas. And if they have any problem, the first point of contact is your GP surgery. So, GP surgery can be considered as the primary care in the UK. So, you have any problem, except for an emergency situation where you can go directly to the hospital. Otherwise, for any other problem, you have any symptom, you anything, you go to the GP, and if GP initially will try to treat you, and GP, that is who will be there will be some GPs or the general practitioners which will be assigned to the particular GP surgery where a person is registered with. And women, they usually get, so all the women who are registered with their GP surgery, automatically they'll get an invite or a letter from their GP surgery. So just before 6 months before the 25th birthday, the women will get the invite so that by the time she's 25 years, she can get her first cervical screening. So, even though the coverage is not 100% in the UK and they are aiming for 100% coverage to ensure a better, even better cervical cancer prevention, but still, this program has helped them a lot. So, for young women, that is between 25 to 49 years of age, the screening interval is every 3 years. For 50 to 64 years, it is every 5 years. And this screening program was started in 1988. And the aim was to reduce the morbidity and the incidence of cervical cancer. And this has helped in achieving both these objectives. It has helped in reducing the incidence also and deaths due to cervical cancer as well. So there are two important concepts which are associated with the cervical or the NHS CSP. which is one is the HPV triage and the other is the test of cure. These are the two things which you should know about because most of the questions which come related to screening will be based on this. Again, I will tell you this is not a comprehensive session because if I start taking comprehensively about the pre-invasive lesion, it'll take us 2-3 hours. This is just in brief, very important points which you must remember and probably will help you solve most of the questions pertaining to this topic. So, HPV triage, what does this really mean? So, when the person is first invited for the cervical cancer screening, either the result could be negative. If the result is negative, then they are returned to routine recall. Or the result, if it is high grade dyskaryosis, this is when the first time cervical cytology is done. The second thing, it could be high grade dyskaryosis. So if anytime there's a high grade dyskaryosis, you have to refer them directly for colposcopy, for colposcopic examination. Then comes the borderline situation. What do you mean by borderline situation? That is, the cytology reveals borderline changes of squamous or endocervical type, or there is low grade dyskaryosis. So if you have either of these, that is, you have borderline changes or you have a low grade dyskaryosis, then you do an HR-HPV test. And this HR-HPV test, when you do this HR-HPV test, this is what is known as the HPV triage. So HR-HPV, the possibility is that it could be HR-HPV. If it is positive, then you refer them directly for colposcopy. If it is negative, you refer them for routine recall. There is a possibility that HR-HPV is inadequate or unreliable, and also your cytology is borderline or it is negative. So in this case, if this is the scenario that HR-HPV is inadequate or unreliable and cytology is borderline or negative, in that case, you will call her for repeat HPV testing at 6 months. So repeat cytology and HPV testing at 6 months. So this is basically what is HPV triage, that if the result is borderline or it is a low-grade dyskaryosis, then you subject the women to HR-HPV. And if it is positive, you refer them for colposcopy. If it is negative, then the routine recall. So this is what is HR-HPV. The second thing is test of cure. So what do you mean by test of cure? Test of cure, as the name itself suggests, so the name itself suggests test of cure means once the cure has been done, then you are testing the women again to see if everything is fine. That is what the name suggests, and that is what it means that women with all grades of CIN, once they undergo treatment, they're invited for screening after 6 months again. And during this screening, when this screening is done, if there is borderline changes of squamous or endocervical type, or there is a low-grade dyskaryosis, as we previously discussed. So if they are treated for CIN and then again they're invited for screening, so one is that this is negative. If it is negative, they go for the routine recall. If it is high-grade dyskaryosis in this, then they are referred for colposcopy. If there's a high-grade dyskaryosis, they are referred for colposcopy. And if again it is a borderline change of endocervical or squamous type or a low-grade dyskaryosis, then you refer them to the HR-HPV test. And this is similar to the HR-HPV triage, which we just discussed. But there's an important difference in this. So if the HR-HPV is positive, then you refer them for colposcopy. But if the HR-HPV is negative, you don't refer them to routine recall like you did in the normal HPV triage. In this case, you will call them for screening after 3 years, which is irrespective of their age. So you know that if the age is more than 49 years, then we call them after every 5 years. But in this case, if she's undergone treatment for some kind of CIN and then the HPV triage was done and the HPV testing came out as even negative, then also you'll call her after 3 years. And if after 3 years she's fine, then you can move to the routine recall. Okay, I hope this is understood. Because again, I'll emphasize this is something which is very important. So, management after abdominal results, you usually proceed with the excisional treatment if there is a high grade dyskaryosis or there is CIN 2 or 3. And usually we can use LEAP, which is the loop electrosurgical excision, or you can use the large loop excision of the transformation zone, which are basically the same procedures. LEAP is the terminology used in the US, and the LLETZ or the large loop excision, LLETZ or the large loop excision of the transformation zone. This is the terminology used in the UK. And this and LEAP, they basically involve removal of the lesion along with the clear margins. You try to also obtain the clear areas so that we are sure that the entire lesion is removed. Again, a thing which is specific to the UK is the HPV vaccination program for all the children. So all the children from the 8th grade in the school itself, they get vaccinated. And this HPV, the Universal HPV vaccination program, was started in the UK in 2008. And initially, the kind of vaccine which was used was Cervarix, which targeted the HPV type 16 and 18. Then in September 2012, the vaccine which was introduced was Gardasil, and this offered protection against 4 HPV types, which is 6, 11, 16, and 18. And then in July 22, Gardasil 9 was introduced, which is supposed to provide protection against 9 HPV types. And this is the vaccine which is supposed to be most effective. And now the NHS, the NHS CSP, it uses this particular vaccine. And what are the various HPV types which are targeted in this is 6, 11, 16, 18, 31, 33, 45, 52, and 58. So not only the low risk types, the high risk types, also the intermediate type HPVs are included by this particular vaccine. So it provides a more comprehensive coverage against HPV disease. This vaccine is also now available in India. So the routine adolescent vaccination program, all the boys and girls. Previously, when the vaccination program was started in 2008 in the UK, it just included the school-going girls. And now they have included boys as well because it also provides protection against anogenital warts and anal cancer. Sometimes also the penile cancer and some oropharyngeal cancers also it is supposed to provide protection against. So typically, the children who are in the age group of 12 to 13 years or the school grade 8. So the 8th standard, when most of the children would be in the age group of 12 to 13 years, is the time when they would be vaccinated. And this again is through the school. So in case they miss the vaccine in the school, then what they can do is they can receive it up till 25th birthday and they can contact their GP surgery who will guide them how to get the vaccine done. So those who have received 1 dose by September 23 are considered fully vaccinated because now previously when they started the program, there were 2 doses of vaccine which was given. But now, as per the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunization UK, this I think is 23 or 24, they have taken the decision that a single dose of HPV vaccine provides robust protection, and that is the Gardasil 9 vaccine. So, a single dose now is mainly used, and that is enough to provide robust protection. So, those who had received vaccine one dose by September 23, they are considered fully vaccinated. So, what is the effect this vaccination has had in the UK is it has helped in reducing the risk of HPV infections as well as the related cancers. The problem mainly is that the cervical cancer screening program is not taken, the smears are not taken by the entire population, especially the immigrant group. They may not visit the GP for the screening, and that is where the problem lies in the UK. But the vaccination program and the cervical screening program overall have helped in reducing the incidence of CIN3 and cervical cancer, especially those who have been vaccinated between the ages of 12 to 13 years in comparison to those who never got the vaccine. So, this program has successfully almost eliminated cervical cancer in women born since September 1, 1995, because they were eligible for the vaccination program and they have got the vaccine successfully. So, coming to the next highly topic, which is the Jehovah's Witness. So, Jehovah's Witness, what exactly are Jehovah's Witness? Jehovah's Witness is basically a religious group who are known for their different kind of thinking, and they follow the strict biblical standards, and that is why they may have certain restrictions related to their treatment. And the basic restriction they have is they are against the transfusion of whole blood, RBCs, WBCs, plasma, platelets. And this refusal is not based on any scientific rationale. It is mainly their religious belief. And fortunately or unfortunately, as a doctor, because in the UK scenario, you also encounter the immigrant population. An immigrant group is a large part of UK population, and if you practice in the UK, you will be treating a lot of immigrants. So there is a high chance that you come across a Jehovah's Witness, because they form about 1,42,000 of the entire UK population. So there is a high chance that you may come across a Jehovah's Witness when you are practicing in the UK. And that is the reason why the MRCG exam may also have questions. I've never seen a complete SBA on Jehovah's Witness, but one or two SBAs is not a, sorry, I've never seen a complete EMQ on Jehovah's Witness, but one or two SBAs can be asked. So again, this refusal is religious, not based on scientific rationale. So it kind of becomes a problem for the doctor how to deal with it. The clinical implication is that this is not a preference, but it is a religious mandate. And it is illegal as per the UK practice to go against the religious belief of these people. So the ethical and legal framework is patient autonomy is legally binding, and even if their refusal leads to death, doctor has little role in what they can do, because administering transfusion against consent of a person who is Jehovah's Witness can be considered as an assault under UK laws. So you cannot forcefully tell them to get the transfusion, even if it is life threatening. But what you can do is you can refuse care. If you feel that it is against your ethical principles to treat such patients because you cannot let them die, then you can refuse treatment, but you must refer them to another clinician. And also, what you need to do is you need to use special blood refusal forms to document consent choices. So, their files, it should document that they are Jehovah's Witness. How you need to manage them in pregnancies? One, I told you that their files should have this label of Jehovah's Witness. Everybody who is dealing with the case, they should know that they are not to be administered blood. And rather than midwife led care, consultant-led care is essential for Jehovah Witness patients. So I am not sure if you are aware of this, but in UK it is the midwifery-led obstetric care. So pregnant women, if they don't have any complication, they will not be with a consultant-led unit. They'll be with a midwifery-led unit. And during the time of delivery, they can take a choice whether they want to be delivered by the midwife in an MLU or they want to be delivered in a labor room by the midwife. A doctor in a UK scenario would be called only if there is a complication or if midwife feels that they are unable to handle the patient. So for a Jehovah Witness patient, consultant-led care becomes very essential, and you should document everything in her file. And it is important to document advance directives that in case, based on her clinical condition, if she requires blood transfusion, she is not to be given blood transfusion. So you should ensure from the beginning that her hemoglobin level is optimized and you give her iron, folate, B12, everything you give her so that her hemoglobin remains optimized. And if she loses a little blood, it does not cause her much compromise. And you have to counsel such patients. You have to tell them that based on their clinical situation, because if everything appears normal and there's a little requirement for transfusion, then there's no problem. But suppose she's a case of placenta previa and you feel that she might require a cesarean section and there might be a chance that she may have much bleeding and she may require transfusion. So it becomes important to counsel these patients from beforehand that receiving no transfusion can be life threatening. Also, in these cases, an advance directive that you take it from her that she is refusing transfusion, you note that in the file. And also, you can take consent for cell salvage. So, therapies like cell salvage, where the patient's own blood is passed through the cell salvage machine, it is purified and it is auto transfused back into her. So, you can give her this option that in case you have excessive bleeding, is cell salvage acceptable to you? And if she agrees for that, again, you can document that in the file. So, the acceptable alternatives, cell salvage, hemodilution, hemodialysis. Sometimes they may agree for transfusion of clotting factors or hemoglobin based carriers. So, again, this needs to be discussed and it needs to be documented in her file very, very clearly. Now, special situation is children of Jehovah's Witness. So, parental refusal of transfusion is not final for children because children, even though if they are minor, the parental consent becomes important. But if a child is suffering from a life threatening disease condition and the parent is refusing transfusion because they are Jehovah's Witness, doctor can take their stand and they can take legal help in that case. Because if the child is also considered as an independent individual, and in case of a life threatening situation, the doctor has the right to involve the attorney from the trust and connect with them and tell them that this is a life threatening situation. And for the life saving purposes, they can transfuse blood to the child. So that was all for this session. And if you have any queries now, you can put it on the chat. And that was all for this session. Thank you so much for being here and all the best for your exams.